Okay, so I've recently been asked by quite a few people, mainly because it's gig playing season here in Dojo Land. Whoops, I dropped my pen there. But I've been asked by a bunch of people, what is your exact pre-flight checklist, so to speak, for gig playing to make sure that you get all your ducks in a row and to make sure the gig goes the best that it can possibly go? So we're going to cover that today in our episode of Dojo TV. So, the pre-flight checklist, right? I use that term because, of course, airplane pilots have very detailed checklists that they go through to make sure the airplane doesn't crash. And it's pretty similar for gig playing, right? There are key things that if we accidentally screw them up, our gig will absolutely crash and burn. And we don't want to do that because this particular bagpiping activity is not about us. It's about the family or the bride or what have you, the topic of the gig. That we need to make sure that it goes really well. So I have a very detailed checklist that I go through. You can write down what I'm about to tell you, or we also have, if you look for the link, there might be a learn more button in this very video right now, or there might be a link in the post. Either way, I'll make sure you get the link to our free PDF all about our 3-stage gig preparation cheat sheet, we call it, in order to make sure gigs go awesome. We highly recommend it. It's something that we offer all of our fans here at Dojo U, so check it out. But anyway, let's go through this list. And again, if you don't feel like downloading the PDF, just write it down. Here we go. First thing on my checklist, if applicable, right? If they requested a contract, we need to make sure we complete that contract. We cater it to the specific event. We send it off to the customer, that it gets returned by the customer, okay? And that once it's returned by the customer, we contact them to let them know the contract is all set, right? It's a little bit of a pain in the butt, and you have to make sure you get that duck all lined up there for your gig. All right, next thing, mobile phone calendar entry. So I'm assuming we all have mobile phones here. You're probably watching this video on a mobile phone. I think at least 50% of people watch this on a mobile phone. So on that mobile phone, we need to make sure all of the details of the gig get into our phone. So the good news is, if you have an online calendar app, you can type all the details into that gig and it will, or into that calendar rather, and it will synchronize with your phone. Okay, that means you can even synchronize the location right into it. So all you have to do is open up your calendar on the day of the gig, press navigate, and it'll take you to the gig. But we need to make sure all those details get into that mobile phone. Next up, we need to make sure in that very same calendar app that we have set adequate reminders. I don't know if you've checked out the Dojo TV episode where I talked about the painful story of missing a nice family's wedding and leaving them without music at their wedding. It was a terrible experience. It was awful. I don't recommend anybody miss their client's wedding. Had I had a calendar entry in my computer with adequate reminders, so you set your calendar to remind you when gigs are coming up, right? If you have those adequate reminders, you're going to be all set to go. You need to make sure you check that off the list and that you have those reminders that you need. And it'll automatically remind you and make sure everything's the way that you need to go. Next thing on the list, you have to have absolutely no doubt where the venue is. Another brief story here is, I actually now live in the neighborhood where this happened, but sometimes the cemetery is not right next door to the church. And I had found the location of the church and put that in for my gig. But when I got to the church, there was no graveyard to be seen. And it was a mad dash to try to find the graveyard and get to the gig on time. And I had screwed that up, right? You need to check off that you have absolutely no doubt and there could be no error as to the location of your gig. Next thing, uniform has to be fully prepared before the day of the gig, right? It needs to be fully prepared in time to remedy something in case it went wrong. Like, what happens if one day you just can't find one of your ghillie brogues? Okay? That day will probably come. You need to check at least 3 days before the gig to make sure your uniform is in good working order and that the dog didn't eat your ghillie brogue and go bury it in the backyard, okay? Your bagpipe has to be fully prepared. I'm not going to go into any detail on that in this video, but there are steps you need to go through to make sure your bagpipes are properly maintained. And you need to make sure your bagpipes sound really good and they're really well tuned at least a few days before the gig so that you don't have a mad scramble to try and get a bagpipe that sounds good on the day. That would be very bad. Next thing, are there any special repertoire requirements? If so, those have to be learned. Next thing, the week before the gig, you need to follow up with the client, speak with them, and make sure that everything is in order and that the gig is still on. Remember, a lot of weddings don't actually happen. If you booked it 6 months ago, you absolutely need to follow up a week or so before the event to make sure everything's good. And then the last thing on my checklist is I make sure that the day before the gig, I send a text message, if possible. The vast majority of people in the world are text messaging now. So I send them a text message the day before or the morning of, right? With a little bit of time to spare, just to let them know I'm all set to go, everything's good, and we'll see them at the gig. So, that's my list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 items that have to be done before the gig in order to make sure everything goes really smoothly. So there you go. Again, make sure you download the PDF guide to operating perfect gigs. If you want to make sure you just have the best tried and true system that we use, just use it to the T. It'll never fail you. It's right there, and we love it. We hope you love it too. We'll see you in the next episode of Dojo TV.